This segment with Ricky Thompson, Alliance Bank, also brought to you by Richard Carr, Buick GMC Cadillac, your Baylor Bear hotline. Ricky Thompson joins us, Baylor Sideline Radio. But, Ricky, what an emotional week for you. The 50th year of the 1974 Southwest Conference Championship. And we had Grant Tapp on when they announced that they would do this for this week with Air Force. And he was phenomenal and amazing at times how sharp he could still be. Your thoughts about what does this week mean to you?
Well, I tell you, you can really sum that up pretty quickly when you just know that 60-something guys will be back. Think about that, Smoke, 50 years ago, and you're going to have 60 guys that are back. I don't know how many even we had at the time, but pretty amazing that you can get that group of guys back together, stayed pretty close through all those years. And that just tells you a little bit, not only about what that team accomplished, but what the relationship was like between the guys that were on that football team, that you can have that kind of response some 50 years later.
Ricky, when you think about that team, that game, was that game obviously was the seminal moment of the season, but was there one before that gets lost in the shuffle that people maybe forget because it was so momentous to beat Texas?
Well, Paul, actually, I think there were several. I think maybe it starts with one nobody really ever talks about, and that's Oklahoma State at home. I think they were ranked 8 in one poll, and we beat those guys 31-14. Steve Beard had a fantastic game and just really handed it to those guys, and followed up that next week on the road at Florida State. Now, Florida State wasn't what they are today. Of course, they're 0-2 today.
What are they today?
Cheap shot, Rick. Cheap shot.
Well, yeah, I'm sorry. Even now, Paul, they're a lot better than what they were then. I mean, they were in a losing streak that was pretty phenomenal in itself at the time. And we go down there and we're down 17-0 at halftime and look terrible. Coach Tapp kicked in the locker room door because it was still locked. Burt Reynolds was being inducted at halftime, and Les Benson takes the band director off the ladder and sets him down because Coach Tapp says get the band off the field, and he took him to heart and did it. So we came back and won that one 21-17, and then the next week go on the road and come from behind in the fourth quarter and beat Arkansas 21-17. So there were some really big games before we ever got to Texas that we had to win that maybe at the time weren't considered that big because nobody really knew how good we might be.
Ricky, sorry to bring the mood down, but Utah this past weekend, that's going to be really cool. And hopefully the Bears can make it even better with a win against Air Force. But I guess we do need to talk about Utah first. What were your impressions coming out of that game? Certainly a tale of two halves, the rising injury, right there in the middle of that. What did you take away from what we saw in Salt Lake City?
Well, I think part of it is something we struggled with last year, and that's quick starts or not having quick starts and letting the game get a bit out of hand. Even saw it on the road against UCF last year in a game that we won some way by scoring 26 in the fourth quarter. But I thought maybe the moment got to us a bit, got behind quickly. Rising, great quarterback. I'm not sure he was really the difference in that game. I think the difference in that game were some mistakes that we made, a block kick that turned 10 points around. And even though Rising was out, he really had one touchdown drive, guys. I mean, he had a 2-yard drive, and then they returned a blocked field goal, 77 yards, which is really a 10-point flip. But you just can't have those kind of mistakes in a game against a really good football team. And I'm telling you, those dudes could play defense. Their front seven probably as good as we'll see all year, if not the best. But the other side of that is we hung in there tough. We came back when it was 23-12 on Josh Cameron's touchdown. That's a third quarter. You're in that ball game. You hold those people to 292 total yards, you should have a chance to win that game, and we didn't. And we know the struggles on the other side of the ball that were really a problem, and probably more so the difference than a Cam Rising or a Utah defense. I mean, Utah offense, our defense did what they had to do. And I think offensively, we really struggled, guys.
It was 23-0 at one point. And yes, there was the strip sack, but that counts. That led to a touchdown or a score. And then, of course, the blocked field goal. That counts. That's 77 yards. That doesn't show up in the offensive stats. I mentioned on Monday that Utah dominated Baylor. And some Baylor fans got a little bit sensitive over that. Would you say that that was too harsh, or was that about right?
Well, I see both sides to that, Smokey. I think Utah dominated the first quarter offensively. They had 150 yards in the first quarter. They didn't do much in the second quarter offensively, and with that, you put yourself back in the game. But 23-0, that's pretty much dominating in itself. You just can't afford to do that. Now, I think if you look at the game as a whole, a 23-12 game is not the domination that we see at times and getting the score out of hand. But to a certain extent, yes. And I do think that their defense did dominate the game.
Ricky Thompson with us, part of that 1974 team that will be honored this weekend, sideline analyst for Baylor on 365 Sports.
Ricky, I did like that you mentioned that they had one real touchdown drive in the first half in that game. So when you look at the defense and the way that they played, I mean, granted, not against Cam Rising for the entire second half, but they did stop some things. They did some things that they weren't doing. They have to play an offense that's going to run right at you all day long in Air Force and their triple option veer, whatever you want to call it. Do you think that bodes well for this week against the Falcons?
We played the run pretty well, and I think Air Force lost a lot of guys on offense. I don't think they lost 10 starters on the offensive side of the ball, so that has to affect you. I think they've struggled some offensively. I think maybe the run game is a strong part of our defensive football team right now. So I think probably this game fits us pretty well. The touchdown, particularly with the back coming out of the backfield at Utah, was a blown coverage. I mean, we saw that, and I think Coach Randa spoke to that those couple of mistakes there were giving up big plays that should have never happened when you're in the right call. But we've seen what this Air Force offense can do, and we saw it in person a couple of years ago in a bowl game when it was way too cold to be playing football. But they really took it to us, put 30 points on the board. I don't think we ever slowed them down. I think it'll be a little different. I think Coach Aranda will adapt to that. I hate playing these teams like this, particularly in the regular season when you have to spend a week getting ready for an offense that you'll never see again. And I think from here out, you see some version of the spread. And I just think that's the concern to me, is it's an offense you prepare for 1 week and then you never see it again. And these military schools are so disciplined and run that offense so well. I think we've seen time and again them have big games against teams that they really shouldn't. So I know there's some concern there, but I do know too that this is a game that the Bears have to win. I don't think that's an option. I think it's early in the season. I know you don't need to say it, but I do think this is a must-win football game.
I was going to ask you about DeQuan Finn before we go, but I have to ask about that bowl game because we were there as well. Were you on the sidelines during that game?
Yes, I was.
Oh, my
and it
gosh.
was cold.
Did you get paid triple for that? Oh, my God, Ricky.
You know what? I didn't. And let me tell you the worst part of it. This is a funny story if you got 2 seconds. We finished that game, 12 degrees.
Yeah.
So we get in the locker room, and, man, I'm stripping out of clothes because I had on so many warm layers that it wasn't terrible. So I get all of my warm clothes off. I mean, everything but like a polo golf shirt. And Coach Aranda comes out and says, "Get on the cart with me to do the post game." Well, here this post game. So here this dude goes in the golf cart back out on the field. I've got on a short sleeve shirt, and we ride all the way to the other end of the field to the TCU locker room. to do post game from the other end of the field. We get there, the guy driving the cart gets off and goes in. So I finish a random show. I've got to walk all the way back to the other end of the field. I couldn't even feel my hands by the time I got back. It was 12 degrees, so that was a lot worse than the game. But it was awful. That was bitterly cold. I've been in one game colder than that, and that was in St. Louis, playing with the Redskins. And other than that, that's the coldest game I've ever been in.
Yeah, that was something else that day. And we got to watch most from the press box, but still had to be out there a little bit. And I don't know how people did that the entire way. I mean, that was craziness. Ricky, just what are your impressions of DeQuan Finn through a couple of games? I think accuracy, obviously isn't always there. But Randa mentioned having a little bit of nerves. It's kind of surprising because he's played in a lot of games. But what's your feel for kind of just what's going on with him through a couple of games and, where you think this is headed?
Yeah, I knew that was coming. I think just what we've seen from Finn at this point is probably not good enough to win football games. I'm not saying he doesn't have that ability. He can run really well. His arm is better than average. I think he struggled with accuracy. Probably what would bother me a little more than that is maybe pocket presence. I think he's really struggled with that, with the rush and which direction to avoid a rush and maybe turning his back to the line of scrimmage at times. Those are things that are coachable. You can get out of that. But I'll just say this. He's going to have to play better for us to win football games, to win big football games. I know he's capable of that. You don't ever want to get into quarterback situations. I know these are kids, and I know they're getting paid now just like a lot of us do, but they're still kids, and it's tough calls when you have to make a change there. So that wouldn't totally surprise me if there might be, but I guess we'll find that out Saturday.
Yeah.
But I know he can play better than he's been playing, and I saw that on tape before he ever got here. But I think that if you ask Finn personally if he could play better than he did in the first two, I think he would tell you yes.
Well, they didn't make that commitment. Forget about just the fact that they brought him in. I know NIL and all that, and that gets brought into the play, but they didn't make that commitment to not have him play. And boy, would that be an interesting. Like we saw, SMU has now changed from Preston Stone to Kevin Jennings, who finished and played in the championship game of the AAC last year. And that's just 2 or 3 weeks into it. We've seen Florida change, basically all but change their quarterback. How difficult is that on a team when you make such an immediate change at quarterback? And I'm not saying Baylor's going to, but if they did.
Well, and that's where I was headed earlier. To make that call this early is really tough. And it wouldn't be throw out NIL, throw out any of it. When you name a kid through camp, you name him the starter, and you start talking about changing 2 weeks in, that's a tough call. It's tough on the football team, but I think, too, that maybe a football team has a sense of who needs to be playing. And they may think that's Finn. They may think it's not. I don't know what they think. But those guys are smart, and they generally know or have an opinion at least of who the best guy is to have in the game. And I think one thing that overrides the fact of transfer, whatever it may be, you've got to win games. Coach Aranda's got to win games. I know Spav on offense has to call the game the way he thinks is most appropriate, gives you the best chance to win. And I think that's the quarterback you have to play. I don't know who that is right now, but this early in the season, it was sure to have been a lot easier if Finn would have had a couple of really good games, which about the first series he was in, he went 39 yards for a touchdown untouched. That looked pretty good.
Yeah.
But you've got to get better play back there, and I think everybody knows that.
Is that the first time? I think that's the first time that Utah and Baylor have played, so that's obviously the first time you've been to Rice Eccles. What were your impressions of that stadium and the crowd?
Pretty cool. Different atmosphere up there. Stadium's not that big, but it's right in the middle of the campus. I'd forgotten that that's where the Winter Olympic opening ceremonies had been some years ago. Still had the torch at the end of the stadium down there. So I thought that part was really cool. There were pictures in the press box of those opening and closing ceremonies, and pretty cool. I think it's a neat environment. Stadium holds 51, so it's not huge, but they've won, 36 out of 38? That speaks really all you need to know to me when you're 36-2 at home out of the last 38 ball games. So I thought it was really cool. I'd look forward to going back with maybe a different result.
Yep, I agree. They had a really good run with Coach Whittingham, and they play like it too. They play like him and his personality. Enjoy. What is there, a luncheon on Friday to celebrate the 74 team, and then obviously there'll be whatever is done during the game. I know you have sideline duties, but enjoy a trip down memory lane and enjoy being around the guys that helped win a conference title when you were there.
Well, that's really fun. We got a dinner Friday night, and I think that's probably going to be the most fun event for all of us, because we'll spend that time just at dinner at the Letterman's Lounge, and they'll probably have to run us home to get us there before the game starts the next day.
I bet they do.
That may be a late night.
I bet they do. Hey, man, thank you very much for your time, Ricky. Ricky Thompson with us, former Baylor and Washington, then Redskins wide receiver, Baylor sideline radio analyst. Someone brought up in the chat about would you have him just one show go down with some of the memories of playing at Baylor, but also with Washington. We've discussed that with him, with Theismann, his roommate and best buddy when he played in the NFL, but we will do that. Paxton, you asked a question. Sounds like a big deal for Baylor. Texas doesn't celebrate 2005 every year, but I get it. They don't celebrate 1974 every year. They're celebrating this year because it's the 50th year. And most anniversaries and celebrations, you get the 10-year, 25th year, and then 50th year. And believe me, the stories behind that, which we'll tell you later in the week, they were about to shut the program down. They were close to having no administrative support, and that kind of gave them a chance to at least continue that football program, and Grant Taft's belief to do that too.